Good morning, sirs, ma'am. I am Francesca Andrade. I'm going to discuss dactyloscopy, its concept, and as allied science in dactylography. Learning objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to first define dactyloscopy, fingerprint, and dactylography. Second would be enumerate the principles of fingerprint science. Third would be appreciate the importance of dactyloscopy in criminal investigation. Now, let us first define dactyloscopy or and as well differentiate dactyloscopy from dactylography. Now, dactyloscopy came from two Greek words means which are dactyl, which means finger, scopin, which means to study or to examine. Dactyloscopy, the difference between dactyloscopy and dactylography is that dactyloscopy is the examination of fingerprints in order to establish identity, while dactylography is the science of using fingerprints to uniquely identify someone. Dactyloscopy is the forensic analysis and comparison of these fingerprints as a means to identify a person or an individual. In addition, dactyloscopy relies on the analysis and classifications of patterns observed in individual prints. Fingerprints are made of series of ridges and furrows. Fingerprints are made of series of ridges and furrows on the surface of a finger. Introduction to methods to record, lift, and develop prints under various conditions has led to the advancement in the forensic sciences. Studying as well the fingerprints is much reliable, infallible, and absolute method of identification when it comes to criminal investigation. Now, also this method is very cheap and effective method in developing the identity of those individuals who perpetrated a crime. Now, as to the definition of fingerprint, fingerprint as an impression is the reproduction on some smooth surface of pattern or design formed by the ridges on the inside of the end joint of the fingers through the medium of ink or any coloring substance capable of producing visibility. As to science, it is the identification of person by means of the ridges of the fingers to include the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Now, as to the historical backgrounds of these fingerprints. The fingerprints had its origin in China, where it was in vogue for many centuries. The Chinese employed the fingerprint system for the signing of contracts on the part of the illiterate. Infants at that time were recorded for fingerprints for personal identification. Also, the Chinese were all acquainted with the essential characteristics of fingerprints. Emperor Shi was the first Chinese ruler who devised a seal carved from white jade. On one side of it was name of the owner, and on the other side of the impression of his thumb. Such seal were used in sealing documents as a sign of authenticity. authenticity. Now to the importance of these fingerprints. First, fingerprints serve to give evidence. Second, it prevents impersonation. Third would be speedy identification of wrongdoer or criminals. Also, it aids in the judiciary in the penal treatment. Next would be identifies the bodies mutilated beyond recognition. And lastly, it helps us to identify victims of disasters, calamities, floods, and etc. Now, as to the principles of fingerprints, we have three. First would be the principle of permanency, or what we call constancy for other terms, or persistency. Now, this principle states that the fingerprints are unchanging or constant from birth until the decomposition of the body of the person. Third principle would be principle of individuality. This principle provides that there are no two fingerprints that are exactly alike. except if two fingerprints were taken from the same finger and the same person. Also, two fingerprints may be alike in its pattern or design, but considering its minute characteristics, they differ. Fingerprints of two person can be similar but not identical. Third would be the principle of infallibility. It provides that fingerprinting is one of the most reliable means of personal identification because what? Because fingerprints cannot be forged. Now, these are the reasons why fingerprints is one of the most infallible means of personal identification. First, the dermis of the fingerprints is already formed 3 to 4 months of the intrauterine life and remains unchanged throughout our life until the final stage of the decomposition after death. Second, the pattern formulation formed by the papillary ridges contains peculiar characteristics. What we also, in other words, is unique, upon which the person can always be identified by the fingerprint examiner. Third, almost every police and law enforcement agencies throughout the world accept, adopt, and utilize fingerprint system as a means of identifying a person. Fourth, the court and other authorities had since time immemorial taken cognizance of its importance as a means of identification. Admissibility of fingerprint by expert testimony as to the identity of thumb mark of fingerprint is admissible. Now, why fingerprints important? First, 100% unique to the individual. Physical features change, but fingerprints do not until decomposition sets. Second, ridge patterns and details in small areas of friction ridges are unique and never repeated. Third, friction ridges develop on the fetus in their definitive form before birth. Fourth, ridges are persistent throughout life except for permanent scarring. They do not change with age. Friction ridge patterns vary within limits which allows for classification. There are two layers of skin, the outer scarf or epidermis and the inner scarf or dermis. These layers of skin of a person are very important to note, for if the epidermis or outer layer of scarf of the skin is damaged, fingerprints can still be redeveloped. If the inner scarf or inner layer of the skin is being damaged, what we call dermis, there is no hope for forming the ridges in its original formation. The fingerprints may come into its formation, but with great scars that affect the change in their fingerprint. Let let's use John Dillinger's case as an example. John Dillinger, for back for serious note, is a notorious gangster and a police character who attempted to erase his fingerprints by burning them with acid. But as the time went by, ridges were again restored to its natural feature. The acid he applied temporarily destroyed the epidermis of the bulbs of the fingers. Again, if if the epidermis or the outer scarf is destroyed only, that means that the fingerprints can still redevelop unless the the dermis, which is the inner scarf, was destroyed during the attempt of erasing your identity. Well, it would be difficult on the part of the law enforcement agencies to to analyze such fingerprints, since those fingerprints will not redevelop because because the part that was destroyed is the dermis of the fingerprint. Next, can fingerprints be effaced? or can be erased? Can fingerprints be erased? No, as long as the dermis of the bulbs of the fingers is not completely destroyed, the fingerprints will always remain unchanged and indestructible. Next question, do fingerprints remain unchanged? Impossible to do, but there has never been a lack of trying. Jandeline circulative acid used that time. To change the pattern requires obliteration of the dermal papillae, 1 to 2 millimeter deep. Next, attempts to destroy pattern causes disruption, irreversibly adding more detail. Are fingerprints inherited? Namamana po ba? The general shape of or overall pattern of fingers and palms can be inherited. Family members will often have similar patterns or designs on the same fingers of their hands. The tiny details in the fingerprints ridges, however, are not inherited and is different between all friction skin areas of all persons, even between twins. Number of ridge detail for a fingerprint to be accepted as evidence. Again, we have no international rules or laws setting the required number of similarities of latent and suspect fingerprint. Well, some countries has set points of similarities. For England, 16 is already enough. 16 similarities. For United States, 12. For European countries, 15. Now, how about in the Philippines? In the Philippines, there is also no law or provision of the Constitution that directs required minimum number of ridge characteristics in order for a fingerprint to be accepted as characteristics in court. Wala po. Therefore, the acceptance of fingerprints as evidence depends solely, nakadepende lang po, on the satisfaction of the judge as presented by authorized person during judicial hearings. In addition, we need the educational background, training, and experience of fingerprint examiners are more important than the numbers of ridge details. Napaka-importante po sa ating judge. Again, for opinions, opinion means the result of the critical study and comparison by a fingerprint examiner. Ito po yung sa expert opinion. Also, only the judge is authorized to declare whether a person is an expert witness or an ordinary witness. In People of the Philippines versus Medina, it is the counterpart of Jennings' case in U.S. This is the first leading judicial decision in the Philippine jurisprudence in the science of fingerprinting. The summary of the case: on February 12, 1932 at night, Mariano Medina breaks into and enters to the window of the house of James C. Rockwell. Medina took several personal properties of Rockwell. One of the properties taken by Medina is a box, which was discovered in the vicinity of the scene of the crime. A constabulary officer named Agripin Ruiz discovered a fingerprint in the surface of the box, which was compared to the fingerprints of the accused, which is Mario Medina. It was found out that the right middle finger of Medina matched with the Latin print lifted from the silver box in 10 points. A case was filed against the defendant and was later on convicted. Again, for U.S., People versus Jennings. Also, it is the first authoritative case involving fingerprints as evidence in U.S., which was decided by the Illinois court in 1911. It happened in Illinois, USA. The complete name of the accused is Thomas Jennings. The law of multiplicity of evidence states that the greater the number of similarities or dissimilarities, the greater the probability for the conclusion to be correct. In addition, the more similarities of ridges between the suspect's prints and the latent print establish a positive result. In summary, today, police officers in most countries use such systems called automated fingerprint identification system, which we also AFIS, To search rapidly through millions of digitized fingerprint records in a database system. Fingerprints recognized by AFIS are examined by a fingerprint analysis before a positive identification or match is made. Fingerprints analysis has been used to identify suspects and solve crimes for more than 100 years, and it remains extremely valuable tool for law enforcement. One of the most important uses of for fingerprints is to help law enforcement agencies or our police officers to link the perpetrator to a crime, or else produce a witness for a crime committed. Now, fingerprint also identification also helps investigators to track a criminal's record, their previous arrests and convictions, to aid in sentencing, probation, parole, and pardoning decisions. So, to wrap it all up, dactyloscopy is very essential in law enforcement agencies in order for us to identify, locate, and provide evidence of guilt of those who perpetrated crimes in the scene of the crime or crime scene. That would be all. Thank you, Sir Mom.